Welcome to the Crown City Podcast. I'm your host, James DePietro. This is a show about building a community for all and how we make our neighborhoods our home from Pasadena, California. On this episode, I am proud to welcome actor, producer, and writer, and the LA history girl, and I'm going to ask you to pronounce your name because we had this conversation beforehand, and I want to get it correct, so I'm going to have you say your name. So
Malia Miglino.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. We were talking about this before we started recording, how we mispronounce and pronounce our names correctly or incorrectly. So I wanted to make sure that you said it correctly because I've been rehearsing it the wrong way.
It's so kind of you to care this much. I really do appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Well, as a fellow Italian last name holder, I want to get it correct.
Thank you.
So to get us started, can you share a little bit about your background? As I know you're from Seattle.
Yep.
You famously lived in a haunted Victorian house in Washington, and then you made your way out to Los Angeles.
Yeah. All right. I'll give you the condensed extreme history of my life. Grew up in Seattle, Washington. My dad's a musician, so I kind of grew up in the circus, I like to say. Growing up in the 90s in Seattle was a very interesting time, specifically being that it was like the birthplace of grunge and all that was happening. So I lived in a Victorian fourplex. And we had one of the big 4 apartments, and we had like little basement apartments underneath. And the craziest stuff in my life happened there. Recurring nightmares that I later turned out to, I had a recurring nightmare of a little boy, then was told years later that somebody had followed me as a child, and he came from my house in Seattle, and his name starts with a V. I finally researched the place I grew up, and there was a little boy named Victor who was 3 years old that had fallen off the balcony of the apartment I grew up in, so that's terrifying.
Crazy story.
Yeah, very scary. And just lots of paranormal activity, and to the point where the bedroom that I had lived in was my bedroom. My parents ended up switching with me because I was so terrified of that room. And then when we switched bedrooms, I was okay. And then, of course, years later, my mom is like, oh, yeah, I would see things, people were talking. So when I was little, I would say, like, the people are talking to me. And it was very scary. But my life in Seattle was not scary. It was very happy, spent around a lot of musicians and a lot of artists. And so I think that really did give me a foundation of, oh, you can chase your dreams and be an artist, and that's totally okay. And so when I had always known that I wanted to move to LA as soon as I graduated high school, and I had been auditioning and I've been in plays and in commercials and stuff since I was very, very little. So it was just kind of a second nature thing to me to want to come to LA and like pursue Hollywood and do that. And so as soon as I turned 18, I moved down with no fear, which is crazy. Because when I think about moving now, I'm like, that'd be so scary. But I was not scared. Like, I think I was just so firm in what I wanted to do that it was really kind of no issue. And I, of course, thought, oh, I'm going to live in Hollywood. Like, you moved to LA, you moved to Hollywood, and I didn't. I moved to South Pasadena. That's where I found an apartment that I loved. And I, of course, at the time, I thought it was like the farthest place ever. And now, of course, I know it's absolutely not. And I love it. And it's become a huge part of my life. But so I went to school and I got a certificate in beauty and special effects makeup because that was my backup and kind of my my compromise with my parents for not going to like proper college. Even though they were completely supportive of my dream, they were also like, but if acting doesn't work out, like,
you need a plan B.
Yeah, like, or at least have another skill set. So I did that, and then immediately started working on sets. I would do makeup and act in films, and then for the better part of 15 years, makeup was kind of my true income source. And then when the pandemic hit, I realized that I had been miserable for a very, very long time. And I think it's a very easy thing to get into the mindset when you have the job that's making you the most money, that you don't want to keep pursuing other things or you feel like you can't because it might not make you money. And so I think over that time, I had started making my own content on YouTube. Loved it, like truly loved it, but I didn't know how that would sustain me or make me money. Then the pandemic hit and I couldn't look for work on set as a makeup artist, couldn't look for acting work either. So I just threw myself into YouTube and then started dabbling in TikTok. And once the world started to open up again, I did a couple makeup jobs, did one other feature. And I was like, this isn't for me. Like, I have to make the jump. I have to start pursuing history full time and content creation on my own full time. And that's kind of what's led me to this place.
Wow. It's quite a story. So, did you have any early mentors that were especially important to you? I mean, you mentioned your family being in kind of the arts and music.
Yeah. I mean, there was a couple teachers. There was one drama teacher specifically in middle school. And I have said over the years that acting had saved my life. And I do truly believe that, because I think, like a lot of people, those, pubescent years are very, very difficult. And I had gained a lot of weight, which had affected my mental health a lot, just because I was getting bullied and all of those things. And I really found that acting and losing myself in a character, whether it's healthy or not, it was a way for me to escape myself. And it really helped me. But then I kind of had this period of time where I was so self-conscious, I didn't even know how to pursue that. And then I had a drama teacher in middle school that would come to me, and she's like, I don't care, I will give you part, like, we need you in this. Like, you're too good to let this stop you. And that was huge for me, because she gave me the confidence to be like, screw it, it's not about what you look like, it is about your talent, which is a hard thing to remember, especially in a place like LA, that like talent can speak above appearance, which we all have to keep in mind and try to remind ourselves as easily and as often as we can. But when I did move here, one of the people that I met when I was 19, I was so fortunate to meet her, is my good friend Jen Page. And at that point, she had already been directing and she had been an actor, and she really took me under her wing and brought me into this film family. And that's how I got involved with the indie film world. And with her and I have produced multiple things. We produced and sold a reality show that was a fantastic time. Like, we did a lot, and it was really her kind of pushing me. Like, she was the one that told me, you need to make your own content, because I cared about history and none of my friends did. So I would tell them about these things and they didn't care. And she's like, you got to make your own stuff, because somebody will care. It's not us, but somebody will care. So I think I attribute, and I owe her a lot, I feel like, because she pushed me in so many ways to like pursue what I'm doing and to push further than I even thought that I could do.
So we were talking about this before we started recording, about how comfortable you are in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Because I am very uncomfortable. I'm a podcaster. I like audio stuff. I'm very comfortable with that world. How did you get so comfortable being in front of the camera?
It's weird. So I still hate having my photo taken. If it's a still camera, I want to kill myself. Like, it's torture to me. I hate it so much. But I think, especially when it comes to like somebody else is filming, I just let it go. I just completely trust the fact that I got this job, or I'm in this position because somebody thought I was good enough to be here. So I just put it somewhere else. Like, the ego goes out and I'm focusing on what I'm there to do. The difference was when I did start doing my own content, it was just me and a camera, and I felt like a fool. Like, I truly felt so embarrassed. Like, who am I? Like, this is so embarrassing. It's just me and a camera talking to this camera. So my first show that I ever did, Macomb Mondays, was very kind of a vampy version of me talking about haunted history, but it was kind of a version of like Elvira Had a Baby with Drunk History, because I would drink copious amounts of wine, and people thought, oh, she's just like trying to get sponsorships. Like, no. I was drinking because I was so embarrassed that I was like, I gotta loosen up. I gotta like shake off like, this nerves. And so that's why I would drink in the beginning. And I think just over time I was able to be like, who cares? Like, if I look like a fool, I'm only looking a fool to myself. Nobody else is here, so it's fine.
Well, that was before you had, 130,000 TikTok followers?
Yeah.
50-some thousand followers on Instagram.
Yeah.
So it's worked out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel in my head, I feel like the numbers are still quite small. But yeah, I think I'm a firm believer, if there's something that you want or a life that you're chasing, you don't have the time to let your ego stand in your way. So if being comfortable in front of the camera is necessary for me to get to where I want to be, then I have to be comfortable in front of the camera.
That's a good approach. So you've talked about kind of the Victorian haunted mansion that you lived in.
Yeah.
Fourplex. So you have an interest in kind of the creepy side of things.
Yeah.
But also the history side of things.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you would tell people stories and they wouldn't care, but you would.
Yeah.
I'm the same way. I was driving with my sister through town. I'm like, well, let's talk about that flagpole over there, because I know about that flagpole. It's like one of those things where it's like no one cares but you.
Yeah.
So where does history kind of fall into everything, and what does it mean to you?
For me, when I look at everything that I've ever been interested in, it all boils down to story. So I was drawn to acting because I was telling stories. And that has truly morphed into I get a different kind of enjoyment and fulfillment from telling people stories. And I had always spent a lot of time in cemeteries and graveyards, which just seems very odd to some people. To me, it's not, because everybody buried there has a story. And I've had a very mixed relationship with the thought of mortality my whole life. So researching people, and I would just do this. If I found a headstone that I was intrigued by and kind of like stood out to me, I would take a picture of it so I could remember the name, or I'd jot it down in some notes and I'd go research it, because I was like, I want to know what this person's story was. Like, who was this person? So when it came to, like, allegedly haunted locations, yeah, it's interesting that it might be haunted, but I was honestly way more interested in who built it, who lived there. If it is haunted, who are the people? So it was less about the paranormal activity and more about why it might be happening or what the origin of that was. So I think that's where some of my friends kind of lost the interest, because it'd be these deep dives into like the architect and the land, and they're like, okay, but who died there, right? And so it was the thing where it's like, well, not every time, it's not always because somebody died there. It could be somebody loved it there, or the land, or all of those things. So I think history for me, it's just story. And I truly think when people say, oh, history is boring, it's like because you haven't heard it right.
Right.
And so that's what it is for me. It's the story. It's getting to tell people stories. Maybe speak someone's name who hasn't been spoken in 100 years. Like, that kind of stuff is like so rewarding.
It is. And I think back about when I started getting into history, and I think I had a really good history teacher in high school that really kind of told those stories, and it really made that connection with me. I think from there it was just like a downhill slide in terms of like what I was interested in. But it's interesting you talk about the cemeteries. I have a very interesting morbid curiosity with life and everything like that, as kind of you do as well. I don't really understand kind of going and visiting relatives at cemeteries, but I love going to cemeteries for the exact same reason you do, which is walk through the cemetery and you see a gravestone and you say, who was that person? Why did they live this long, that long? Mm-hmm. Where were they from? What was their life like? If they died we have a lot of cemeteries here, thinking about Mountain View, which has a lot of people from the Civil War period, a lot of early settlers of Pasadena. What were the painters like? They were very famous family here in Pasadena at the turn of the century. They had a big hotel on Washington, and they're buried in Mountain View. And it's like, what was their life like, in 1905 or 1890 when they were living? And so there's such a pull to cemeteries because I want to hear those stories. Mm-hmm. And those stories really come through the ground in a very kind of comforting and in a surreal way, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned that you started creating content during the pandemic, which is kind of when this podcast kind of came about. You did Grave Hunter, horror history rants, live from the history closet. There were quite a few.
Yeah.
So what content did you feel was missing that you really wanted to explore with your channels?
I think for me, as a lifelong, spectator of people that made content about, like, quote unquote, like history or haunted history, the one thing that I was not seeing was a lot of women presenting it. And it was kind of in this very stuffy way. And then when it came to haunted history, it was just legend. Like, they weren't fact checking. And I think people were so concerned that if you do tell the true story, maybe it, negates what the legends are, that it makes it less interesting. I think that makes it more fascinating. I think it adds a whole other element to it. Because I do think legends can create their own haunting in a way. So I think for me, it was just, firstly is, I wasn't doing it. And I feel like everybody has their own way of presenting and their own spin they could put on something. But I also just felt like I'm so fascinated by these things. I have to believe other people are. I can't find the content that I want to watch talking about these things. And there's certainly no young female talking about these things. So I think for me, that's really what it was. It was just wanting to create something that I would want to watch that I wasn't able to find anywhere else.
And that segues nicely into Haunted Discoveries, which is the show that you've done. You're the historical researcher on that show.
Yeah.
So kind of how did that project kind of come about?
Well, so one of my friends, his name is Brandon Alvis, he had been on Ghost Hunters. And so he was creating his own show. And he knows that I'm this history obsessed person. And we've always kind of, been of like minds about that. And so he reached out and he basically asked me, he's like, would you want to be a part of this? And to be honest, I was nervous because it is a paranormal show. So the fact that it was going to be heavy history based was very, very important to me because I wasn't interested in being a part of something that was just going to rest on the laurels of legend, and it's not. And I'm so proud that it's not. And so I was brought on. I was very lucky. Again, it's always about who you know, which can be very frustrating, but that's true with any industry. So I think I got very lucky in that instance and I was brought on, and it was a really incredible experience because despite having made for the better part of 11 years, that's what I started Macabre Mondays on YouTube originally. I've been talking about haunted places for a long time, but I've never been taken part in a paranormal investigation, purposefully so, because I was like, you know what, this is terrifying. Like, that's not for me. I've had enough experiences that I haven't welcomed. I'm not trying to welcome them. And then I kind of had this paradigm shift where I was like, well, I don't know about you, but I get very invested in the people that I research,
Yes.
Very emotionally involved. And, we shot primarily in Kentucky, which you can imagine has a lot of heartbreaking history. And a lot of times we're talking about enslaved individuals who maybe didn't get to have their, stories really told, and trying to find out as much information about them as I can. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, okay, if I want to keep an open mind here and I've been researching these people, this is my opportunity to maybe fill in some gaps. Or what if I actually got to experience a conversation with this person? So instead of it being a scary thing, I looked at it as like, this could aid my research, could be like the missing piece for something. So that's kind of how that all came about. And it was a very interesting experience, had a lot of crazy things happen that I never thought I would experience. And it was so much more emotional and so not nearly as terrifying. There were a couple times that I truly was like, I shouldn't have gone in that room, and I regretted it because it was such a terrifying experience. But outside of that, most of the time it was pretty happy, or just like really fascinating and neat when we had all of these, we have equipment on loan from like NASA and the Department of Defense. Like we have like scientific equipment. We're not just using REM pods that a lot of like paranormal shows would use. So when you can see that you are actually getting environmental anomalies and there's no explanation, like that's cool. You're like, oh, something is happening here, So that is how I ended up on the show, and that's kind of how that led me to taking part, I guess, in paranormal investigations.
I mean, can you imagine your teenage self getting to drama? Yeah. Experiencing what you've experienced thus far in your career?
No.
Yeah.
Not at all.
It's crazy. So you've mentioned and shared that you really enjoy the Victorian era.
Yeah.
So what is so interesting about the Victorian era, and then what's the connection to Los Angeles?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think the Victorian era is, oh God, it's just so endlessly fascinating, because I think that we have so many ideals about it as a society that are just wrong. Like we think of them as being this very prudish culture, which in a way they kind of were, but in a lot of ways they were very sexually liberated. It was almost in a way this first like sexual revolution in a very kind of closeted way. And they're, which I find very fascinating, because you have a lot of things going on societally that kind of told them like, no, put it behind closed doors, but it almost made them freakier, which I'm always fascinated in, kind of the more like spicy parts of human life. And on top of that, just this deep obsession with death and life. And I think because they lived through so much tragedy that they had to really rectify that. And it was the first time you have this spiritual movement, you have spiritualism happening, and people are trying to expand thinking about, like, is there life, and can we, like, after death, and can we contact them? So there's a lot of levels to that I find fascinating initially. And then when I moved to LA, and I started really diving into the history of LA, I think people think about it as Hollywood history, Hollywood history, Hollywood history, which is very cool, and it's a very fun and amazing and important thing to talk about. But I'm always frustrated that when people talk about, like, the Gilded Age, you know, of America, they're talking about New York, they're talking about Chicago. They're not talking about Los Angeles. They're not talking about San Francisco. And so many things were happening here in California during that time that changed the landscape of the country in so many ways. And so many people ended up here. So it's like, how can you be fascinated by half the story? Like we're talking about these people in there in New York and Chicago or the Midwest, but not about how when they ended up in California, like so many people did. So I think for me, I started to really mull on that idea of what did Victorian Los Angeles look like. And then I just started seeking out, are there any remnants of it left? So then it became looking for Victorian homes, and then who lived in these homes? Where were these homes? And by doing that, I just found this rabbit hole of amazing stories about what life in Los Angeles during the Victorian age was like. And it was affluent, and it was complicated, and it was interracial, and it was awesome. And it's so frustrating to me that people don't talk about it more. And then when you look at, you know, Pasadena, like, this was Beverly Hills before Beverly Hills was Beverly Hills. Like, people were here living in mansions when that was still a ranch, you know? So it's all of these things that it's just, I guess it just came out of frustration for me about my obsession with Victorian history in Los Angeles. And it is funny because when we talk about, like, creating my own content, I've been doing it for a very long time, but nothing hit until I started talking about Victorian Los Angeles. And that, I just feel like that tells me that people want to know what was happening then, you know?
Well, I've talked about this on this podcast before with other guests, that I moved to Washington, D.C. and the East Coast because I loved history.
Yeah.
And I thought that there was no history in California. That's a whole other topic. But it's funny because we don't think about history being here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that is. You know, I'm an LA native. So
unicorn.
Yeah, very much so. But I had to leave and come back.
Okay.
So I'm not here. I haven't been here in my entire life. But for the most of the part, I've been here, but I didn't think that there was any history here because in school there are no classes about California history.
Really?
There weren't at the time. I mean, there was we had to take, and we talked about this in the podcast as well with other guests. But in fourth grade you had to create a mission. They don't really do that anymore.
Okay.
But you had to build a mission. You learn about the mission system in California, which is very important. However, that was about it. You never learned about Mulholland. You never learned about everything going on in that era. Mm-hmm. And there's so many gaps that people just don't understand and know about Los Angeles history. And it's sad that I thought that I had to go to the East Coast to find history, whereas history was right beneath me, literally. We just have not been educated about it at all.
No, and it's such a bummer because it's endlessly fascinating. The characters that ended up here, it's like this weird Wild West meets almost like high society New York, depending on where you are. Like, they were operating like they're butting up against each other, which is so, it's kind of unique compared to the rest of the country. And so I think it needs its time. LA history needs its moment.
Yeah, and you just did a post on the Gamble House.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, because it's a Gamble from Procter & Gamble.
Yep.
We have Wrigley, obviously, from the Wrigley Company. I mean, there's Cranes, which is Crane Plumbing. The list goes on and on and on. I don't know if you know the Blacker House.
No, I don't think so.
So the Blacker House, or is it the Blacker House or the Bleecker House? I'm not sure. It's the twin of the Gamble House.
Oh, okay.
And it's near the Langham.
Okay.
It's privately owned still. And if you drive through that area, you'll see it. I mean, it's just, and I think some of the footage from Back to the Future was filmed, the interiors were filmed at the Black House.
Interesting.
That's what I heard. I'm not sure if that's correct. But I knew that you just did a thing on the Gamble House. I thought you'd be interested in that as well. But it's still privately owned, which is rare and still exceptionally well maintained. Which is, it takes an immense amount of resources to own a green and green.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
but I loved your piece about the Gamble House. So you're a full-time content creator now.
Yes.
And you've picked up a couple of different nicknames. Grave Hunter's one, but then you also got the nicer name of LA History Girl.
Yeah.
So what makes LA history different? I know you've talked about a little bit, but I mean, compared to like Seattle, where you were coming from.
I think, Seattle history is really rough and tumble. You get a lot of people coming out. It's more similar to San Francisco history. So you have people coming out from east that are on their way to Alaska for the gold rush. So you get a lot of, it's rough and tumble. There's a lot of prostitution. There's a lot of gambling. There's a lot of corruption. I think LA history represented something very different than Seattle and San Francisco. I think people came here for opportunity, not as a way to make means and then leave. I think they saw it as this beginning, and we can make it a place, and we can make our riches, and we can stay here. And when you get into later history, it becomes a place of salvation for people. Like you mentioned the Wrigleys, you mentioned the Gambles of Procter and Gamble. These are Midwest families that came out here for health, because people forget that California's, especially Southern California and LA in the greater Los Angeles area, used to have all of these resorts that people would come to feel better if they were dealing with tuberculosis, or they were just concerned about, we're taking in all this wet, moist air. We need to go to the dry climate. We'll be healthier. So you get all of these people that are essentially, what do they call it? Snowbirding out here, fall in love with it because they see the potential. And so I think that's what makes it interesting, is you have all these really big established families from the East Coast and the West Coast that end up moving here and settling here and then transforming landscapes. Like Wrigley bought Catalina Island. You have all of those crazy things. And so I think LA, since the earliest 19th century, it's a place of opportunity for people. And then when you get the film industry out here, when the film industry moves from the East Coast to the West Coast, it becomes the place where dreams come true. But it kind of always has been. Like you mentioned Mulholland and how he learned the aqueducts down by Alvera Street, and then he ends up creating, the great LA aqueduct and draining the Owens River, and it's a whole thing. But the upshot is it's always been a place where the impossible has happened. And so I don't think there's anywhere else, maybe in the world, that's had the same influx of dreamers and big money that are looking to change and start fresh somewhere the way that LA has. And I think that makes it incredibly unique.
I mean, your story in itself is an example of that. What is your life like, and what is the world kind of an influencer, and kind of what are the pressures to kind of maintain and grow your audience? I mean, because from the outside, as someone with less than 1,000 followers on Instagram, not to brag, but but I mean, I don't have the pressure, because that's not what sustains me. Mm-hmm. But is there a lot of pressure that you feel to kind of create content and create interesting content and kind of going above and beyond?
Oh yeah. I mean, completely. And I think especially when I made the jump to do it full time, because I realized, and there was a step to that. I had originally tried to pitch myself in a show that I would love to have on the History Channel. And I got responses saying, we don't want single female hosts. And when you have networks telling you that, it's disheartening. And then you realize, okay, well then screw it. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to do it on these platforms. Yeah. And, just because I've had an influx of followers within the last year, there was a better part of a decade between YouTube and then Instagram and then TikTok where that wasn't happening. And I was doing it just for myself because I just wanted to put it out there, and I really enjoyed making the content, and I enjoyed the small group of people, or creeps as I called them, that did engage and did enjoy it. So I do think that the pressures hit me when I got the rise in numbers, because then you start realizing I can make money doing this. But the difference is, unlike other jobs, I mean, every job to some degree, especially in the entertainment industry, you only have so much control. But when you are primarily making content for social media, you truly have no control over the algorithms. The amount of hours I spend researching the newest trends and whatever, because maybe this time will work and this time isn't working. I'll have a video that has 1 million views, the next one barely hits 1,000. And when that directly affects your income, because if you're looking on how to actually make money as, I guess, a quote unquote influencer, or like, I'm very niche. I make history content, which isn't like I'm trying on outfits all the time. Like, it's not as easy to monetize, but I also do travel. So I have to lean into more of like the travel influencer to hopefully make money. But with that goes, I can never be on vacation, because vacation is work. And I was in Italy for 2 weeks, was sick as hell, wasn't posting consistently, and all of my numbers dropped. And I don't think people understand necessarily. They think people complain or like, who cares? You're just vain that you want the numbers. What they don't understand is we pitch ourselves, or if people come to us for sponsored posts, or, gifting opportunities, or, like press trips or whatever it is, they want to see your analytics. They want to see your engagement rate. And when it dips, that directly affects how much they think you're worth. So it is horribly stressful because you have no control over that. So it is full-time, all-consuming, and you really, I think it can look glamorous, and I think for some people it is. I think some people have reached a certain level where they're making hundreds of $1,000s literally from a TikTok post. But they have assistants, they have management. They're not doing all of the grunt stuff. When you are like a micro influencer, I think is what I'm technically categorized as, which is all these strange terms, right? Because I definitely don't see myself as an influencer. It is only you, and you're thinking about it all the time, and it can be frustrating. And there's this pressure of, if I go out for drinks somewhere and I'm like, oh, I haven't been here before, and I leave and I'm like, crap, I should have filmed that, because it's content. You can't turn it off, which is hard.
That was going to be into my next question, which is like, how do you deal with that pressure? And like, can you really go on vacation? No. And I think I'm going to be very honest, very transparent. And I really appreciate that.
There is a lot of, you have to fake it till you make it. So, social media across the board is a very glamorized version of people's lives. So you have to make it look like when you are at that hotel, you didn't pay for that hotel. Because if people already think, like, if you want to pitch to a hotel, they want to know that you've already worked with other hotels. Now, I'm very lucky most of the time now. I am getting to work with the hotel, but that wasn't the case in the beginning. It's just like, I know people that are like fashion influencers that will go out and buy clothes, pose in it, tag it, do their little like to know it, and they return it because that wasn't gifted and they can't afford it. But they have to look like they can. So again, and that's why I do try to find a balance. I've always been very transparent on social media. I never plan on changing that, because I do think it's important for people to know what's real and what's not real. And so much of what people put out isn't real. And when you are doing, say, a sponsored post, you have very little control over that. That's the company telling you what they want. So it's weird. It's a weird kind of augmented reality to live and work in. But I do think because I'm more niche and history based, that automatically tends to get me in with people that want authenticity, that want truth, which is very helpful. But I do think, especially for myself, it's harder for me to make money than other, like, quote unquote influencers, because of the content that I do. It's just, you think about it all the time because it's your survival.
Right. Well, I think one thing I was thinking about, you had a post recently about going to like a tour, and they were talking about windowsills or something like that.
Yes.
And I really appreciate the post, which is, it sounds silly, but it's not, because you go to a historical place, you go to a historical event, and they talk about something that's mundane and interesting to the docent or the person. And there's a question in here, which is, How do we inject more of the humanity into our history?
This could be a really controversial answer. I think, unfortunately, forever, really, there has been this whitewashing of history. And I don't mean that necessarily racially. I mean, we are focusing on all the pretty things or what people think are pretty and good things to talk about in history instead of talking about the humanity. Because very, very, very rarely are you going to have people that lived in, say, we're talking about a historical home, that didn't have what we would see as like really extreme flaws now. Like they're complicated. And so instead of doing the hard work and painting a human picture of a complicated individual and why they made the choices they made then, versus how we would view them now in the context of how the day was, knowing that we can't necessarily condone it with today's brain, but we can maybe understand. And I think that's always the point of history, right? History is always gray. It's always complicated. And I think you have this older echelon of people that are a lot of the like history boards of these beautiful landmarks that want to make sure that people that are coming and paying for the tour are getting the happy things. They're not painting the full picture. And I think the biggest downfall of that is it's kind of like the movie industry. You're not trusting your audience. You don't think they're smart enough to roll along with the punches. So you're going to explain it all to them, or you're going to leave out a bunch of information that's actually the interesting part. That's actually the part that could make you connect with the people that live there. That, yeah, maybe you wouldn't want to have a drink with the person, but now you understand them, and now the home feels like a home to you and not just a place made of wood and glass. So I think that's what it is. I think people have to trust that tour groups and people visiting and their quote unquote audience will be okay with the true history, even if it's complicated, even if it's messy. Look at how many people are obsessed with wars. So complicated, so messy. I'm obsessed with Henry VIII. Not a great guy, but like he's deeply human. He's deeply flawed. For all of his bad stuff that he did, he actually did some good things, and it's, no one is black and white. So I think that's what it is. I think that's the only way forward is people have to start trusting that they can tell the full stories to make a place more human, because they're not doing any service to the location by acting like, oh yeah, here was this prim and proper family and everything was great. Look at this bolster. You know what I mean? It's just all of those things. You're not gonna, you're losing the true story.
I remember driving through, so I lived back east and I drove back to Los Angeles. So I drove cross country to Los Angeles. And I remember going to Louisiana and visiting one of the plantations there. And it was just like, look at this beautiful plantation and how glorious it is. And what an amazing history and the history of the family that was here. It's like, well, let's talk about the slave quarters behind it. This is a lot more complicated, and we don't see that. And because the docents don't want to talk about that part of the history, right?
Yeah.
How do you balance kind of accuracy versus accessibility? Because I think your approach is very accessible, and you make history a lot more interesting and entertaining. Not in a bad way, but it just you make history the way it should be told, as opposed to just being a lecture. So how do you make
very
it?
Kind. Thank you.
Well, that's very true. And so how do you make history more accessible to people?
I think it does. It comes down to the humanity.
Yeah.
Trust me, and if you go back and watch my videos on YouTube, they're hours long, and I will go for a long time talking about the architecture of a place because I'm an architecture nerd and I love it. But I do think I realize that most people, that's gonna lose them. I have to focus on the people and what makes them human, which most people are connect to flaws faster than they connect to like achievements and perfection, because most people don't see themselves as perfect.
Interesting.
They want to see people, especially, and this maybe sounds bad, but they want, especially if I'm doing a beautiful home, they want to know what was wrong with these people. Like, because the first thought is envy. How do I get that? And so if you can make them human, you're like, okay, I understand. I hate using the word over and over again, but it's true. It makes them more human. So I think I try to focus on, I'm led by stories. As much as I love architecture, I really do dig and dig and dig and dig and dig before I decide to do a video on a place, because I want to make sure there's a story there that has a catchy enough hook that like a Gen Z kid will be like, oh yeah, that's fascinating. But it has to be a fascinating person, which everybody is, but it can take a long time to find what makes them tick a little bit, or makes them a little bit different than just like the average Joe, or what people perceive as what a normal, like, say, Victorian person would be. So I think that's what it is. You have to just find the things that, honestly, what you find interesting, like the thing you're reading and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, that's it. Like, that's how you make it accessible. Like, that's what you lead with, is that, and then all the other stuff, that's what you follow it with.
So you, my voice is dying. You recently came back from Italy, and you posted a lot about your trip. Do you have any kind of highlights you want to share?
Oh God, you know what? I think for me, and this maybe sounds like a Captain Obvious moment, but it's a weird thing to walk amongst Roman ruins, which is, I had never, besides London and being around like the couple Roman walls they have throughout the city, I had never been to Rome. I had never been around things that are, thousands of years old. And then when you're reading about the people, and then when I've gone back and started my research, because I hadn't delved that deep into history. For me, my kind of knowledge starts in the medieval era and then works its way up. So now I'm working even further backwards, really. Right. And it's just how not different they were that I think is really interesting. But still, I think the highlight for me always when I travel, especially if I'm visiting historical sites of parts of history that I maybe haven't spent a lot of time on, it's how interested I get once I've been there. Like, a lot of people will be fascinated by something first and then they want to go see it. Oftentimes I find that I need to have that physical connection to a place because it makes it real to me, and then I want to know everything about it. Like the first time I went to Versailles, didn't know that much about King Louis XIV. Came back home and it was my entire life for a year. Like, I just researched everything I could, because you walk those halls, you want to know what the hell was actually happening here. Like, who were these people? So I think Italy, the highlights for me was just delving into a completely different world. Like Venice, are you kidding me? It didn't feel real. I felt like I was on a back lot, to walk down these dark alleyways and not feel scared, which is very odd, because I feel like a dark alleyway you should feel, but you're in another world, and to know it's like where Casanova would have walked. And I don't know, like, the highlight for me was just to be so out of my element, to be in places that were so deeply unfamiliar for me. And it just gave me yet again this new, like, renewal of joy of like, God, history is great. And it's so amazing these places exist, and how great it is that we can walk in the footsteps of these people, So that was the highlight for me, really, was just getting to be in these places, be in the spaces these historical people were in. And now that I get to like really dive into what their lives were like, because I've been there and now I really, really want to.
I haven't been to Europe since I've gotten a smartphone. And I think it would change my life, because I would just be taking pictures and videos the entire time.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel the same way.
Oh yeah. I think I took like 3,000 photos and videos. I think I've posted 6 videos, and that's just Venice. I haven't even gone to Florence or Rome yet. Like, the amount of content that I took is ridiculous.
So we're going to see this content over the next like 2-3 months?
Yes.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Okay.
That'll be a lot.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. So recently you announced that you have a partnership or collaboration with Visit Pasadena. Can you talk a little bit about that partnership and kind of what you're looking to get out of it?
Yeah. I think that I have been like kind of slowly trying to manifest this collaboration for a long time, because I do so much content in the area. And I had reached out, which is like what you do a lot of the times. Is like, especially when it comes to tourism boards, like you pitch to them like, hey, I have interesting takes on things. I think I could help you guys out. They responded, and of all of the content they don't have anybody doing their history stuff. And so I think for them, they were really interested in having people talk about the many historical locations of Pasadena, in the many restaurants and stuff, because I do some like food and drink content as well. But in my way, which, hate it or love it, I have a very particular way of bringing, showcasing information, but they want it to appeal to a younger audience. Because like they said, the people that come into the office to get the historical brochures are all much older. And if you want to keep these places up and running, you have to have the next generations interested in it. So I think that's kind of where the collaboration was. It's like, oh, I can do that. Like I can find the fun stuff to talk about with these places. So I'm really excited about it. It's been really, really cool to have them be excited about ideas and, learn what they want me to highlight. And it's been a really fun process so far. It's been really cool.
So can you divulge any details about things that you'll be focusing on yet?
So I did the Gamble House with them, and then I had done historic restaurants, historic restaurants and historic buildings for them. And I have one coming up on Route 66 history that I'm really excited about.
Oh, nice.
And then a blog that I wrote for them will be going live on the website as well. So hopefully there'll be more in the future. We'll see. I have a lot of ideas. The old tank up here to pitch to them, so it'll be cool. It's the first time I've had an ongoing thing with a place, which has been really cool. A lot of times it's like one-off, so I'm traveling, I'll work with the tourism board. You can't really keep it going, so since I'm local, it's pretty cool.
Oh, very cool. I'm very excited to see the content that you create. So one of the show's goals is to connect with different kinds of people and kind of how we can explore bringing people together. So what community have you found with the work that you've done? You've called your followers your creeps. That's kind of a throwback to when you had Macabre Mondays and all that kind of stuff. But what kind of community have you kind of formed on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube?
That's interesting. A couple different ones. I can't really categorize them all into one anymore. I think when I used to lovingly call people creeps, it was very much because some of them were creepy. It became a way that I was kind of tongue-in-cheek calling them creeps, and then it became a term of affection. But they were very much interested in the cemeteries and the haunted stuff. That base isn't as interested in as the other stuff that's not as creepy. So there's kind of this dividing line of I know this video will appeal to them and this video will appeal to the other group. And the one community that I have been very excited by, that I've kind of found myself falling into, is other LA history creators, which have been so supportive and so welcoming. And I think that is just really, really cool, especially because the one thing that I have found continuously, especially since I've shifted completely pretty much to history, is how few females there are in the game. And most of the LA history creators are male, but they have been so supportive. And I just think it's very different than what I've experienced in the past. I've had to constantly prove myself time and time again throughout most of the careers I've had. So it's been very amazing and warm, and it's just made me so happy to be so welcomed into that community. And through that, all the other people that live here, like native Angelinos, I think is something that has been really neat. People are like, oh, I've lived here my whole life, or that house is next to me and I had no idea. So those are the ones that really get me excited, and I think those are the people that have really kind of religiously followed me now, the ones that grew up here. Because I guess like you said, you're not really taught that history in school. So I think it's a way of giving back to Angelinos. It's here's your history and here's the things that weren't told you, and have even more pride in where you came from, because it's cool and a lot of really cool things happened here.
Yeah. When you live in South Pass now, South Pass has an interesting history.
Yeah.
Because Pasadena wanted to outlaw liquor,
Mm-hmm.
and so it pushed the liquor sales to different communities, north and south, and then
Yep.
South Pasadena wanted to follow and ban liquor as well. So there's so many different storylines you can kind of tap into,
Mm-hmm.
just within just a mile of where we are
Yeah.
currently, and that's the kind of the fun part, right?
Yes.
Is trying to find the story of what's the story of the old apartment building across the street, or what's the story of, I don't know, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but
Or why our streets are so wide.
Right.
Even little things like that, when you're actually looking at the layout of things, you're like, this is odd. This looks
Right.
like nowhere else in LA. This
Right.
is strange.
'cause
All
Orange
those things are
Grove-
stories.
Yeah, like Orange Grove.
Yeah.
Do you know the reason why they're so wide?
Was it because of the trains?
So one theory I heard was on Orange Grove, they were so wide because the carriages had to turn around.
Oh my God, that would make sense.
And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that would it makes sense to me. Why on certain Orange Grove when it turns kind of east-west, not north-south,
Okay, yeah.
North Pasadena.
Uh-huh.
Why it's so wide is because the carriages had to kind of turn.
Huh.
I don't know if that's correct, but that's what I've heard locally.
Gonna have to look into it.
Yes.
Gonna have to do a deep dive.
Prove me prove me wrong.
I hope that's why it is.
So do I.
Yeah, it's real good.
With your success, when you think about the next year, the next 5 years and beyond, I don't know if you look that far ahead.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I know you kind of have to. What have you planned? What do you have planned or are excited about in addition to your, Italy content and then your Visit Pasadena content? What are other things that you're working on?
I'm honestly, I'm working on a book, which I'm very excited about. I think I just always think bigger. I've toyed the idea of doing walking tours. Kind of freaks me out and kind of excites me. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to delve into it, but it's something that's been requested a lot, so possibly. But the goal for me has always been to have a full-blown show where I can showcase history in a way that I know people will find interesting. And hopefully break a door open for other women in the history world to have a place and not have to be surrounded by a bunch of guys to be accepted into it. So whatever that path is, that's ultimate goal for me, is to just continuously help break that door open.
If you could design a perfect day in Pasadena or South Pasadena, I'll expand it for you.
Thank you.
From breakfast to late night, what would you do? Where would you go? What would you eat and drink?
Oh yeah, easy. Okay, definitely start the day off with a walk to Jones Coffee on Mission and South Pass, which is my daily pilgrimage. Love it. I love downtown South Pass. It's so cute. It's so quaint. It's also Haddonfield from the original Halloween. So if you're a horror fan, why wouldn't you want to have your coffee next to Michael Myers' house? I do every day, and I love it. So we would definitely start off doing that. There'd be a lot of walking involved because I think the best way to view, Pasadena as a whole, but definitely South Pass, is by walking because the streets are so beautiful, the architecture is so beautiful. So we would definitely walk for coffee. For breakfast, oh man, I'm about to give away one of my favorite places.
Well, we appreciate it. I appreciate it.
I am obsessed because I love a greasy spoon. Rain Cafe up on Lake Cafe in Pasadena.
Okay.
So good. One of the best breakfasts you will ever have. So affordable. You can get grits that are good. And instead of toast, you can get banana bread.
Ooh.
You can't, what? It's so delicious. So we would get our coffee, we'd go eat at Rain. We would go to the Huntington because it's the Huntington. It's stunning. You can kill a few hours. You can either go to tea, because I love to eat, maybe want to have some more snacks, or just walk the gardens. I would then go to happy hour at the Langham because, again, I love architecture. I love beautiful places, and I love that it's a recreation almost to the exact detail of the original Huntington Hotel that was there, which is very, very cool.
Yes.
And then we would peruse around Old Town and walk down Colorado all the way to the Colorado Street Bridge, catch the sunset from the bridge, which you just can't beat it. Then I would have dinner at Cafe Santorini because I love it. And then we would have a glass of wine at the Cellar because I love some wine. And the Cellar is great, great vibes. That would be my itinerary.
That is a great day.
Thank you.
I love that day.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you. So are you a reader at the Huntington? Do you know what that is?
No. What
Okay.
is this? Oh my
Let's
God.
talk about this.
Okay. What is this?
This is important.
Yes.
So there's a program called the Reader Program.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a member of it, which shows you how easy it is to get a reader access.
What does that mean?
So getting a reader card means that you have access to their library.
Oh.
And it allows you access to their stacks
Oh.
and also their rare materials.
Isn't there a lock of Abraham Lincoln's hair there?
There's probably a lot of stuff that you probably can't get into even if you're a reader.
Okay.
But it allows you access to all their books and materials. I will send you the information on it.
Please.
So I was given this information by a former guest of the show, and originally I guess you had to get historical and academic references to get a reader card, and it allows you to go in on Tuesday, which they're closed on.
Yeah.
You can just walk the grounds as a reader. So it's funny because if you go on a Tuesday when it's closed as a reader, there are just historians and academics that are just like having coffee and doing research for their own books. They're just like walking around.
Sounds like my dream come
I
true.
know.
Sounds
That's
amazing.
why I wanted to mention it. So what I've used it for is I was stupid project, but doing research on the cheeseburger, which was supposedly was invented in Pasadena. That's a whole conversation in itself. It wasn't founded in 1924, but it was founded in 1927.
Oh.
Yes.
Mm.
So anyway, that's another side story.
Huh.
But I don't want to put the city on blast because they have like paintings and
It's a big deal.
It's a big
plaque
deal.
Or something about
yeah,
it.
yeah. There's a plaque, and I'm trying to find out why 1924 was used as the date. But anyway,
I'm excited. I'm actually deeply invested in this now.
in the reader program.
Well, and the cheeseburger controversy.
Yes. So okay, let's talk about this. So I've been doing this research for about a year and a half on and off, and
How many cheeseburgers have you eaten?
Not that many. It's so stupid. But I'm constantly looking at news articles trying to figure out how this kind of came about.
It doesn't make you hungry?
It does.
I can't watch Bob's Burgers without being like,
well, the problem is I'm doing this research at like 1 o'clock in the morning. So it's like I'm not going to have a cheeseburger at 1 o'clock.
I would.
I know. I can't. Oh, I have kids at home. I can't just leave them to get a burger.
Okay,
at 2
be
o'clock
responsible.
Be responsible. So this is kind of revealing secrets that I have yet to publish. But there was a news article. So Lionel Sternberger was the inventor of the cheeseburger, the supposed inventor of the cheeseburger. In 1927 or maybe later, he did an interview with a newspaper in Hawaii because he would vacation there a lot.
Okay.
And he specifically told the story of how it was in 1927 that he bought the cheeseburger stand and created the cheeseburger. So it was not in 1924.
Huh.
So it's a direct quote from him that it was in 1927. Anyway, let's get back to more important things, which is the reader program. So before you had to have academic referrals, but now they've opened that up, and you can apply for membership into the reader program.
Yes.
So I will send you the information.
Please, 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 please.
As we kind of wrap up the conversation, how can people follow you? For more information, how can people reach you?
You could follow me on Instagram at Macabre Malia, which is a hint at my beginnings. TikTok, I'm LA History Girl. And you can go to lahistorygirl.com and you'll find blogs and links to videos and Instagram feed and travel guides and all sorts of goodies.
Because you do have a map that you can purchase.
Yes. There's two now. There's the historic LA map and the historic San Francisco map. San Francisco obviously has more pins because it's San Francisco and there's a lot that's oddly still standing, which is miraculous considering the 1906 earthquake and fire, which just really puts things into perspective. But yes, so if you are interested in taking your own walking tour or driving tour of historic Los Angeles, you can get my map.
Great.
All good spots.
Well, Malia, thank you for creating such wonderful content, for bringing your wonderful stories to life, and for coming on the podcast. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. This is fun.
It is fun. Continuing our collaboration, the featured song is All Right Here from Pasadena's own The Next Doors. Please follow them on social media and at nextdoorsmusic.com. I want to thank everyone here at Pasadena Media, George, Chris, Bobby, Liza, Eileen, Jeff, Terry, and Jasiri for their special guidance and assistance. For more information about Pasadena Media, please visit pasadenamedia.org. For more information on this podcast, please visit thecrowncitypodcast.com. Until next time, please remember to stay well, read your history books, and as always, I will see you around town.